Hello and welcome to this SVIC interview. I'm your host, Rahim Rahimtullah, and today we are talking about integration platforms as a service. And helping us do that today is an expert in the field. His name is Simon Peel. He is the Chief Marketing Officer and Strategy Officer at Jitterbit, which is an integration platform, is itself an integration platform. So Simon, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yep, thanks for bringing me on. Very excited to be here.
It's great to have you. So just tell us, to start with, IPaaS, integration platforms as a service. Perhaps just a brief overview. What is IPaaS for those out there who don't know, and why might a company want to implement it?
Okay, well, let's start with integration because it's as old as the hills. Ever since there were two systems, people have said, well, how come there's data over here and as well as data over there? And how do we get this stuff working together? And that's often been done on-premise, and it's been connecting on-premise systems together for a long time. And we have buses to do that, and the likes of Tibco and web methods and that sort of thing. But what's happened, as we all know, is there's been this tremendous shift to the cloud, cloud first for everything. Lots of SaaS applications, a big explosion of technology. And so the question is it really the right thing to do to continue to integrate everything on-premise when there's all this stuff in the cloud? And so how do we put that stuff together? The answer really is a hybrid of the two. And this is where this integration platform as a service idea has come from, where as things move more to the cloud, we want to run more integrations in the cloud. However, of course, the world still exists, and so we need to be able to connect back down to on-premise systems. And so integration platform as a service, although it sounds like it's probably only in the cloud, actually is a way to connect things in a hybrid way. But that's where it's born from, right? It's just born from this massive shift up into SaaS and platform as a service itself, and also, you know, all of the cloud-based systems today.
So how much do you say? How much is in the cloud now? I mean, is this pretty much everything? We just assume any business today is pretty much in the cloud, or what's the sort of split and how that's happening?
Yeah, it's a very good question, actually. And the answer is sort of yes and no. So I would say that certainly all of the new stuff is being done in the cloud, and all of the existing stuff is largely being left on premise. And that's the right thing to do. So, you know, it's often said that data has weight, meaning that wherever it's created, it pretty much has to sit. And if you look back, you know, in all of human history, we're creating as much data as been created in all of human history every year or so now. And so you really can't shift that around. That new data from IoT devices, from everything we're doing in mobile and so on, is all being done in the cloud. However, we've got most enterprises still with the vast majority of everything they do on-premise. And so this is where you have this thing where you've got to connect all that stuff. Now, if you look back about 5 years ago, there was all talk about, you know, shove everything into the cloud. Let's take everything and put it into Amazon and everywhere else. But we've realized now as an industry, where does that really get us? You know, it doesn't actually move the needle very much. What does move the needle is getting all of these new systems provisioned in the cloud, getting IoT devices, getting mobile, getting voice, getting AI, and so on. Let's get that stuff going. And then let's just run a cable down to the existing systems on premise or into other cloud-based systems and start innovating, as opposed to schlepping data around, which is really not that exciting.
And so what's the IPaaS market look like today in that case? We have all these different cloud services, AI, voice, IoT. These things only seem to be growing. Digital transformation is a very hot item on everyone's agenda. Everyone is trying to move in that direction. So it seems to me that having an integration service is going to become, I suppose, essential. I don't want to, I say that objectively.
Yeah, well, it's very nice of you to say that. I do appreciate it. But it is actually just logical, no doubt. So there are now 149,000 SaaS apps out there, as one example. So everyone's heard of Salesforce.com and NetSuite and so on. But most people don't realize there's 149,000 SaaS apps. But that's what's happening because people are no longer creating on-premise software to try and sell. All the vendors are creating it in the cloud. So The big transition that's happening as well is you'll remember in mobile when the iPhone came out, Apple created the iPhone. You looked on the device and it had a few little squares on it, and they were all from Apple. Well, now the app stores came along, and then we heard this phrase come into our vernacular: "There's an app for that." So, if you want to check your bank account, you want to know what the weather is, you want to know how your retirement's doing, you want to know how to get from A to B or eat in a restaurant local, there's an app for that. Well, guess what? Now there's a SaaS app for that. And that's a huge difference inside any IT company. IT are used to provisioning SAP or Oracle, and maybe there's 3 or 4 or 5 systems. What happens when there's 149,000? Okay, that's just SaaS apps. If we look at AI, even 3 or 4 years ago, we used to think AI was about just getting an AI platform and loading it full of data and writing TensorFlows and trying to do machine learning, and eventually some rocket scientists would come up with an aha. You know what? There's now 4,300 AI companies out there that are doing each of them doing one specific thing for AI. So, blockchain is another. There's now 140 blockchain companies, more than $1 billion being put into that in a single year. So technology, it's fair to say, is exploding everywhere. And what you're pointing out is that as that explosion happens, someone's got to try and tie all this stuff together. And pretty much everything I just talked about is an explosion in the cloud, not an explosion on premise. And so that's what's driven this vast and massive increase in the need for IPaaS. Now, the IPaaS market has been growing around 70% per year, right? Compound average growth rate. That is really good for quite some time now. And Gartner kept predicting, it's going to tail off, it's going to tail off. And every year I talk to people like Massimo Piscini who would look at it and go, Simon, this is not tailing off, is it? And I say, we just did 130% growth in Europe. We're doing over 100% growth year on year in many territories. So no, it is not tailing off. It is absolutely exploding. So all I can tell you is that there's a vast amount of interest and Google searches going on around how do I integrate all this stuff together. And the question is, how do I do it quickly and easily? Because integrating Salesforce with SAP is one thing, or SAP to Oracle, that's another. To 149,000 things and 4,000 AI, this better be fast and easy. So that's really the transition, the next wave that's occurring now.
For sure. I mean, given there is so much out there, thousands of apps, SaaS products, and so on, I mean, what do you think for the companies out there, for the businesses looking at all of this, how do they go about choosing which of these apps they should take? Do they need to think about integration very early on in that process?
Yeah, so it's funny. I would say, I've been working with Salesforce maybe 15 years or so, and there was always this phrase, phase 2. And integration was phase 2. Phase 1 was you buy Salesforce and you start using it and everything's going to be great. And then eventually you'd find out that, where's all the data? How do I get it? How do I connect it? And that was phase 2. What you're pointing out is the integration is absolutely phase 1 now. Nobody buys stuff in the cloud thinking, I'll worry about how I connect it later. Everything needs to be connected immediately. So when we're getting involved in deals, it's normally when a new infrastructure is being put together, when a new application is being thought about being brought in, when consultants are doing what you talked about earlier, digital transformation. We're going to digitally transform our e-commerce system. We're going to digitally transform the way we deal with customers. We're going to mobilize things that have only been on the website to date. Right baked into that is, and how are we going to connect all that stuff together? And honestly, the existing sort of on-premise or bus-based platforms of the past are not even in the consideration set. It is, I'm doing IPaaS, now which one? So the question becomes, how do you choose which IPaaS? And, if you look at Forrester, you look at Gartner, you look at a lot of the research out there, some interesting things emerge. One thing is that out of the top 4 big things they say you should look at, only one of them is actually product. And that's a turn up for the books, because as technologists, normally we're saying, well, how many features are in this one? And let me look at all the checklists and so on. But what they're saying is things like the cost over time, the total cost of ownership of one of these things is really important. So do you charge me every time I send data? Do you charge me every time I add a developer or somebody that's going to be doing some connectivity? What about, and then we get into support. They're saying not just total cost of ownership, but how does the support work on this thing? Because it seems okay when you're doing a trial for it all to be online. And I'll just look on a forum or something like that, or I'll figure it out by watching some YouTube videos. But when your company's running on this stuff, doesn't really cut it when the system goes down. So who do I call? What are the SLAs? How can I get fixes rapidly, and so on? And then it comes down to also, what's the partner network around this? Are there other people that can use it? Is it straightforward enough to use, or is it a 6-month training program? So with us, most of the time it takes maybe 2 to 3 days or so to get up to speed to the point where you can actually start to do things really well. And a lot of people, although we have a lot of developers that use the product at one end, on the other end, we have people who are sociology majors who are picking up the product and actually getting into production in less than 30 days. So you can hear that's quite a tectonic shift from the older day on-premise days where you had to be an expert for 20 years to be able to use things. So those are some of the shifts and changes that are happening. The cloud represents rapidity and speed and innovation. And so the platforms like ours have to be super easy, have to be able to have a bunch of built out templates that exist already and so on. And they have to be well supported. For sure.
So how do you guys keep up with all this, with the speed of digital today? I mean, as that is your business, is to be on top of this sort of thing, I suppose, that you can offer these integrations to other enterprises, and have developers use it, but also sociology majors, and make sure that it is connected with other potential partners. And there's so many moving parts, I suppose. And in digital, it all can change quite quickly. So how does Jitterbit itself, how do you get a hold of that and make sure you are keeping on top of it?
Well, there's no getting away from the ugly truth that there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of development involved, a lot of testing involved. I think the point is that you make it Jitterbit's problem as opposed to being your problem. So when NetSuite comes out with a new release and deprecates some old functionality that would normally take down your systems, we've already had access to that for the past 3, 4, 5 months. We've been working with NetSuite through the partner program, same with Salesforce, same with SAP that took us over a year to get certified on, and so on. So we make that investment so that you don't have to. That's the essential value proposition. One thing I will say though is, 149,000 times? Seriously? I mean, we'd have to have half the planet working at Jitterbit to be able to keep up with that. Well, the good news is that as technology evolves, we get standardization. And APIs have really helped with that. And if you go back 15 years, 20 years, Oracle had one way of drilling into Oracle. PeopleSoft had another. SAP with their BAPIs interfaces and iDocs and so on is totally different, and blah, blah, blah. But there were only a small number of them. However, now we've got much more standardized interfaces, and the key is APIs. So APIs are relatively standard, and they differ. And on 149,000 apps, sure, they're not, every REST-based API isn't identical, but they're at downside more similar than looking at an Oracle versus an SAP. So that's the sort of partial secret of how we're able to keep up so quickly. We still have to connect to those systems, have to prove we can do that, have to test that we can do that, but we're not, reinventing the wheel every time.
Tell me a little bit more about APIs. I want to know how those work a little bit. So one way that I read them being described in very much layman's terms, which sort of works for me, is that they are the waiter, whereas you're the customer at the table. The API is the waiter, which goes to the kitchen and gets what you want and brings it back to you as the customer at the table. And so presumably in the context of IPaaS, this is happening between programs, between different data sets, applications. The APIs are where the exchange is taking place. Is that correct?
I've seen that analogy, and it's an interesting one. I would use a slightly different one, which is that APIs are more like a plug socket. And so if you imagine everybody having to access power grids and solar panels and, having to create all that stuff, and who's going to do that? So, so everyone has plug sockets around the entire world. The only thing is, if you travel around the world, you realize that, oh, this cable doesn't plug in. I can't power my laptop. I can't get on this discussion today on this webinar because I got the wrong power socket. So what APIs do is give you a consistent power socket. They all look the same, which is great. So now, heaven forbid, but let's just say the American system took over the entire world and everybody had the American power socket. Great, there's your API. Now the reason why the waiter thing doesn't work for me is that APIs just sit there. Power sockets just sit there, right? It's just a hole in the wall. Well, what do we plug into it? And if I want to connect different things together, I need these cables and I need some logic in between. Which power socket do I plug into which device, and how does that device relate to the next device, and so on. So, in this analogy we're trying to build here, it would be a computer and plugging that in, and then a monitor that plugs into the computer, and then a mouse that connects, and so on. So that's the IPaaS component. So the APIs are just there to say, yes, I've got a pretty consistent way of connecting to me, but they just sit there. The IPaaS systems are there to go and plug into those different sockets, the 149,000 SaaS apps, and then move the data around and apply logic to it. So when somebody creates an opportunity in Salesforce.com, who should know about that? When it turns to an order, as an example, then you should go to NetSuite, or you should go to SAP and tell them, hey, there's an order. And then those systems have to come back and say, well, that order's now been processed, and go and put that back into Salesforce so that the rep can say, oh, look, my order's been processed. So that's how APIs work together. The standardization really helps things like IPaaS move forward.
Thanks, Simon. And you talk a little bit about the data there and going between different applications, and therefore they can execute on what they need to do, and so on. And I noticed on your website, you mentioned artificial intelligence and how IPaaS can work with artificial intelligence. And it strikes me that what you say there about the data and creating orders and so on, that can all be automated, I suppose. And I just wonder what is the role here of artificial intelligence in all this, and where might that take us?
Right. Well, there's two elements to that question which I'd like to separate out. So one is there's 4,500 AI solutions sitting out there right now that most people are not using, and shouldn't they be able to do that? And the other is, well, when we're doing integration, shouldn't vendors like us be using AI to predict what kind of integrations you're going to do, and do it for you if we can, or at least try and make it easier? So let's take those two things in order. So on the first one, everybody already has applications and systems and mobile apps they're using and everything else. Wouldn't it be nice if we just applied some AI to it and turbocharged it? So I'll give you a quick example. The labor market is incredibly short everywhere around the world today. There's almost zero unemployment in so many different areas. And so losing staff is a really big deal. It turns out that 30% of people leave a company because of cultural fit. Not because they can't do the job, not because they lied on their resume, but because, I don't like the environment here. It makes me work all night, or works of the week. I don't know what, but whatever. So there's one AI vendor called Human Intelligence. And Human Intelligence, what they do is that a 12-minute survey asking you all kinds of wacky questions that, where is this going? What color do I like? And who are my friends, or whatever it might be. But it comes back with a simple magic number that says what the cultural fit's going to be for you with that company. So the pitch very simply is people can save 30% of their hiring costs with a simple 12-minute survey. That's millions, if not hundreds of millions, for large companies. Walmart with 2 million employees, saving 30% of their turnover. The AI system is sitting there knowing what it can do. Now, so AI is out there as one example. How does that help Walmart when they're sat using Workday as a hiring manager looking at somebody? Well, it doesn't. So what we can do is go into the human intelligence system, take the information and say, look, for John Smith, who's applying for this job, I'll drop that right into the Workday screen, so that as the hiring manager looks at Workday, as they normally do, well, 1 out of 10. Wow, that's not good. Now the system can also say, but this guy's a 10 out of 10 for the telephone support team at Walmart. He shouldn't be a greeter, but he'd be fantastic on the telephone support line. So there you go. One example of how what we call this is AI infusion. It's infusing AI into your existing business processes, literally in days. So we can save Walmart 30% of their hiring costs in a few days, right? And logically, right, how that can happen.
Right. And so Simon, you say they're saying the chap John Smith, he might be right for the telephone team. That comes from the IPaaS, that insight.
No, that comes from the AI tool as well. So the AI tool is going to go, yeah, you asked me, is this person a good fit? Don't think he is. Oh, but by the way, so what the IPaaS does though is say, I'm going to tell the hiring manager, not a good fit for you, I'm afraid, but it can also go into the system and look at someone who's not a hiring manager, who is actually over in the support team. And our intelligence says, hey, you should know about this guy. And that pops up on that person's screen and they're, wow, this person's perfect for me. Yes. So we're adding that intelligence. The main message is, we're doing the infusion. So if you can go and look at any of the 4,500 AI tools out there, don't change a darn thing about the way that you actually code all your systems and so on, and just infuse this massive intelligence into existing business processes today and get it running, in the next few days, weeks. So that's the first category. The other category I think you mentioned was what are we doing with AI to make things easier? And of course, we're doing we have about 62,000 customers working on the system at any one time. And so we've got a lot of knowledge there as far as what connects to what. And when you connect Salesforce to SAP as an example, we can predict pretty closely the kind of fields you're going to need. You're going to want orders to go back and forth bidirectionally. We know that BAPI customer get list is the right API that we call and use on the SAP front, and where to put the resulting information back into Salesforce. So we're using AI to do that and to be able to speed up the way that you do implementations. We're also, though, on the cusp of releasing something literally in the next few weeks where you're going to be able to use your voice to do these integrations. You're going to be able to ask for data. Because ultimately, if you think about applications, those are things created by developers to try and put a screen on the front of the data you actually want to get to. Well, if I'm going to a meeting and I'm driving there and I think, hey, shouldn't I be able to ask the tool, say, hey Jitterbit, are there any escalations or red alerts at the customer that I'm driving to? It's Nabisco. And it should say, checking, one moment, Simon. Yes, there's actually a red alert status that's been a blah, blah, blah. Or I say, how much is the customer I'm driving to right now bought from us over the past year? And it says, well, worldwide, $1.7 million. And blah. Really? So that's what I want. I don't want all this application stuff and integration in the middle and AI and all the rest of it. Just give me access to the data. And that is what we're going to be releasing over the next few weeks, which I think is utterly game-changing. It combines NLP, the natural language processing, together with a bunch of different AI that can then find that data, build the integrations, and get it back to you real time.
That sounds very, very exciting, Simon, and something I think AI, conversational AI, natural language processing, something which we often hear is coming, but we haven't necessarily seen any breakthroughs yet. So I think, Simon, on that note, we'll probably draw our interview to a close today. So perhaps just as the last question there, do you see going forward that AI and conversational AI and artificial intelligence and them coming closer together and really making computers and systems like Jitterbit so much easier for us to use as humans, where we can interact with them, as it were, on our own level and just ask questions and get answers that we need? I mean, is this the way that you see things are going to be moving?
So I think we're entering an incredibly exciting time because there's so many pieces of new technology that are hanging out there just waiting to really zap, because the information is in the cloud. We've got AI systems that are intelligent enough to help us. We've now got these integration platforms that can pull all this information together. We've got systems that provide things like NLP, so I can actually speak to in my normal voice. You'll notice Alexa a few years ago, Siri comes out, it's a little bit awkward to use and so on, but everyone uses Alexa today, and it's so simple, so easy. It doesn't say what, repeat all the time. So these technologies are all there. And there are these moments in technology history, like there were web pages out there, and there was this sort of network thingy that people could access basically with dial-up modems. That became the internet because of Netscape coming together with web pages together with a broad network, and our entire lives changed forever. Right? And now that is exactly what's going to happen very, very shortly with the advent of AI. Has been around since the 1950s. There's nothing new about it. What's new about it is that every single application and every piece of data in the world now is having a plug socket put on it. And so things like our API platform create these plug sockets automatically now for every piece of data in the enterprise, automatically. Now, to be able to do, because of that, all that data is available, the plug sockets are there, we have the technology to plug into those things, and we now have the AI available to be able to use the natural language processing. So we don't need apps anymore. We just ask questions of the data that we know is already out there. So this is about to happen, about to explode big time. It's an incredibly exciting time.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Simon. It really does sound fascinating, and it's very infectious, I think, the way you tell it as well. So we really look forward to seeing some of this come to fruition. But I think, Simon, for today, that's where we'll draw things to a close. So just thank you so much for joining us today, taking the time to be with us today on the program.
Oh, exciting. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll see you next time.
And to the viewers out there, I hope you've enjoyed my talk today with Simon Peel, the Chief Marketing Officer and Strategy Officer at Jitterbit. I just want to remind you that we have another expert talk coming up next week. And it's funny, today we've been talking with Simon about conversational AI and about natural language processing, well, we're going to have 3 expert speakers join us next Tuesday to talk just about this, conversational AI. We're going to be delving a little deeper into that, which is one of the hottest topics today in digital transformation. So do join us for that on the 27th, next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, and see our website, siliconvalley.center, for the details. But for today, that's where we'll wrap things up. So from me, from my guest today, Simon Peel of Jitterbit, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you again very soon. Bye-bye.